you can ask SwiftUI to draw your app's interface for different state changes and rely on SwiftUI to make those changes for you. Making a state change without animation will result in instant transition. To create seamless and smooth transitions in SwiftUI, you need to add animation. In this video, we will look at the three fundamental ways you can easily add animations to your SwiftUI views. There are some advanced ways to add animations to your SwiftUI views. For example, using a face animator view, face animator modifier, or using keyframe animations. We will come to those advanced ways to add SwiftUI animations in later videos. So let's look at the three fundamental ways to add animations to any SwiftUI view. I'll show you how to use the global function withAnimation to add animations to SwiftUI views. Then we look at using the animation modifier, and finally, using binding from iOS 17 and above, and also on other Apple platforms. To animate any SwiftUI view, you can wrap it in the global function withAnimation. For our first example, we have a circle and also a button. We can tell SwiftUI to move the circle from its original position to another position using a state change. Since we are illustrating the first example using withAnimation, I will create a state here called withAnimate and set the initial state to a double to move the circle to a different position. We can use a button tap. So over here, let's add this. With the state variable we just added, we bring it to the button closure and use a condition to move the circle from one position to another position. So when the circle's position is 0.0, we will then move it with this offset. Otherwise, we set it back to 0.0. So by adding a button tap to trigger the state change, we can now go ahead and add the property we want to change over time. So over here, let's add an offset to the circle. With this example, we want to animate the x coordinate using the state variable we defined. So we can now tap the button to make the state change. You have noticed this creates an abrupt transition. So we move the circle from one position to another position instantly without any animation. As I told you previously, in iOS 17 and above, to animate the circle using the global function withAnimation, all we need to do is to wrap the state variable in withAnimation. So let's remove this line and add withAnimation. Then I will paste it here. So now, if I tap the button again, you have noticed we now have a smooth transition when moving the circle from one position to another position. Once you wrap a state variable inside withAnimation, it uses smooth spring animation to create a seamless animation. To customize the animation, we can, for example, bring parentheses here and say, hey, we don't want the smooth spring animation SwiftUI provides. So we can, for example, use is_in_out and set a custom duration using a custom duration of 1 second. That changes the look and feel of the animation. So this is one way to easily add animation to any SwiftUI view using the global function withAnimation. Let's move on to the second example. To create smooth transitions for any SwiftUI view, instead of using the global function withAnimation, we can add the animation modifier and animate with the value parameter. So for the second example, we have a button and also a circle. Let's add another state variable to illustrate the animation. So we add the state variable .animate and set the initial state to a double, that is 0.0. Like the previous example, we want to initiate the state change by tapping a button. So now, if I tap the button and use offset to move the circle from one position to another position. So now, if I tap the button, you can see there is an instant change when the circle moves from the left to right. Instead of using the global function withAnimation to create the animation, we can add the animation modifier. When you add the animation modifier, you need to specify the type of animation you want to create and also add the value parameter. So for the animation, we can say we want a spring animation with the following configurations. We want to have a spring response of 0.5, dampen fraction of 0.6, and blend duration of 0. We get a warning. We need to add the value parameter and specify the value we want to animate. That is the same as this state variable. So I'm going to paste it here. So by adding the animation modifier and specifying all these configurations, we get this smooth spring animation. For the last example, you can add animation to a SwiftUI view with binding. Using binding, you can map the value of one object to another object in SwiftUI so that when the first object changes, you also change the second object to a certain state. So for this example, we are going to use a slider. Anytime we change the slider value, we also animate the circle. So let's add another state variable. For this one, we will add the variable withAnimate and set it the same way as the previous examples. So below the circle, I will add a slider. The slider has two parameters, value and the in parameter, that is the range. So with the value parameter, we want to bind the slider to the circle, so we add the $sign to the state variable we added and specify a custom animation. Then we set the slider range to an offset of 260. So let's attach the offset to the circle. So since we use the $sign to bind the slider to the circle, anytime we drag the slider, you have noticed we also animate the circle as well. So these are the three fundamental ways you can animate SwiftUI views. You can use the global function withAnimation or attach the animation modifier to any SwiftUI view, and also use a binding, like the one we have illustrated here, using the slider.